Hi, and welcome again to the Path to Profit podcast. I'm Brad Dobson with my lovely wife, Dr. Manette Riordan. And today we are thrilled to have Gary Henson on the podcast from businesscoach.com. Welcome, Gary.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for being so gracious to have me on your wonderful show.
Well, we're excited to have you, and I think I'm especially excited to have you share a little bit about your journey. Normally, we'd share a more formal bio, but I think part of the value that you're bringing to our audience today is the fact that you were one of the very first people to really start a coaching business of this kind. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey as well as why you started and what keeps you going, right? 28 years is an impressive amount of time to, especially for a coach, to pick one thing and kind of stick with it. So share with us a little bit of your story.
Yeah, well, collapsing 28 years into a couple of minutes is a bit of a difficult
Take your time. We have all the time we need.
I'll consolidate it down to, as a bachelor before I met my wife, as a bachelor 30 years ago, I started getting in touch with my own personal transformation and how far off dead center I was, and got very involved with a lot of personal growth courses and transformational courses, and living here in Northern California, San Francisco was one of the first hubs for transformation. And as I graduated in 1988 and started getting to the end of the journey of several years of studying along these particular lines of transformation, I met a gentleman by the name of Jim Selman, and he and Warner Earhart actually don't get credit, but really were the authors of coaching and business, in particular business coaching, and a lot to do with personal growth and transformation back in the day. And once I met them and decided that I had a very successful real estate company and I wanted to get out of commercial real estate, and when I got to the point where I was ready to make a transition, I thought I had invented a concept called consulting. And that's how naive I can really be. And I met with Jim Selman. We had a long conversation. He says, "You don't want to be a consultant." And in my head, I thought to myself, well, that's really arrogant for somebody that doesn't really know me very well to make a bold statement like that. He says, "I think you're personally in a perfect position to get into business coaching." And as soon as I heard those words, business coaching, it's like my whole life flashed before me, my whole adult life. I started to think about, wow, coaching people in business, and I just loved business. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 11 years of age, come from a family of entrepreneurs. And when I heard that term business coaching, it just lit me up. And the next thing I knew, that's what I was doing. I was studying his work, his life work and Warner's life work, and starting to look at how does business coaching really have an impact on organizations and their cultures?
I love that. How does coaching have an impact, especially on the culture piece? And so I'm curious along your path. So I'm curious about that piece about culture. And I'm curious, what have you seen evolve in coaching as an industry since you started all those years ago?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I'd like to make a kind of a bold statement about business in general, about entrepreneurship and people that really want to become extraordinary at being an entrepreneur. And I'll segue right into the coaching piece. And that is that I think the missing link for people in business and developing their culture, their leadership, and the environment around them, the people that they have control of because they're working in their environment and their culture. The big missing link is really defining what is an entrepreneur. And in my world, an entrepreneur is someone who goes into business for himself or herself, that offers a product or service. And here's the key, with the anticipation of turning a profit, okay? And I think what happens is that many of us, and I fall prey to this myself, I watched my parents and my relatives, my family do this as I was growing up. We go into business and we think we want freedom and utility and the ability to control our future, our path. And in many of our cases, we want to make a difference in other people's lives. And all that's well and good, but we forget about this thing called profit. And if you can't turn a profit, if you don't have a profit model, or if you don't understand the profitability chain, then what happens is that you eventually either burn out or run out of funds, and you can't keep it going. So what I learned early on in the stages of business coaching, and what really got me excited is developing leaders and their cultures, their teams of people around them, giving them an opportunity to have a two-way dialogue, or the freedom for people to contribute inside of an organization without being criticized or without being held back. So true leadership, in my opinion, gives people the opportunity to help develop and structure a culture that's so exciting that they want to come back and go to work in that culture every day, and not constantly be on the internet looking for the next job or the next opportunity or the next thing that they want to do. But they go like, wow, this is exciting. I want to stay here, and I want to offer my friends an opportunity to come work for our company because it's fun, it's exciting, it's rewarding. We have an opportunity to gain additional income or growth inside the organization, and the freedom to really express ourselves. And if we don't like it, we can even go to the boss or the leaders and say, I don't think I'm a fit here. Could you give me a 30-day sabbatical, or could you give me the time to go out and interview and find the career that I really want, without being criticized or chastised or eliminated from the culture altogether. So when you have that, you have people that really want to make a difference in the entire organization for each other as a team, and for the leadership and for the overall organization. And when you have that, you typically have profit to go right along with it.
That's
cool. I love that.
The way you've tied together the profit aspect with the leadership,
the people and the leadership.
That's really neat. It's easier said than done, right?
Well, yes, it is. But I think that one of the things, Brad, that people miss is if I don't focus on turning a profit. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a heathen about making money, or that's your only focus. But people live in an either-or world for the most part, and that's ordinary. See, extraordinary people don't live in an either-or world. They live in I can have my cake and eat it too. I can be a great leader. I can build a team of people around me. People that are excited, they're eager to be involved, and they want to be here. They come to work with a want to be here attitude, and I don't have to sacrifice and stop talking about making money or turning a profit. They understand that it's job security for them. So if we make money and we create a great environment, a culture that thrives, then everybody wins. It's a win-win situation, and people just don't want to talk about that.
Right. I love that sense that they're not mutually exclusive. And I'm curious, why don't people want to talk about it?
Well, I think people, we live in a society where political correctness becomes the order of the day far too often, okay? And when people are worried about what they say in the workplace, and I'm speaking of the leader now, they get pent up and limited in their dialogue. And they've never been taught, and this is where we could segue a little business coaching conversation in this. They've never been taught that you can have it both ways, and that you can talk about money, not like it's a good thing or a bad thing, but that you can talk about money in a way that people can relate, and they can relate to the organization is profitable, not just for one person, but for the organization itself. And if I'm in lower management or wanting to be in management, and I see the company turning a profit and we grow, we can have a conversation about more employees coming in underneath. And the more people that come into the organization, I have more opportunities for growth and therefore additional income for myself. So it's not just a three-legged dog where the organization makes money and the owner gets to be successful and brag about how great he is, but it's a four-legged dog where everybody does well together and people have opportunities for growth and prosperity down the road.
Right. So that's a balance that you get hopefully in your organization as it grows, or even as it's just small, how can we set up small business owners, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, couplepreneurs to engage that level of leadership and become that organization when they're, hey, they just had a cool idea and they decided to go into business. They weren't thinking about any of that stuff.
Or they get tired of their job and
Yeah, right.
they thought, oh, I'm good at my skill. I can go market this skill by myself.
Yeah, and that, by the way, is the definition of a startup entrepreneur. Somebody who is tired of what they're doing or not satisfied with where they're working, and somehow they see the grass is greener on the other side. I can go out and go to work and create an occupation, and I'll be the owner, and I'll own this. And it's a noble thing for people to do, and I wouldn't try to talk anybody out of it. But as you said, that we've got to consider that there's more than just working for yourself. There's more than just getting started. You've got to be able to turn a profit. And again, I promised I'd get back to coaching. And this is the area where business coaching can bring such a powerful conversation to the table. And I want to preface that by saying most of our clients that we work with, I do train business coaches as well, but in the coaching arena, when I work with organizations and when our company works with organizations, they typically have 25 or more employees. So when you have an organization of that type and you're living in an either or conversation where you think, well, I can either be all about me or I can be all about them, but I can't have it both ways. That's where a great conversation that a business coach comes in and develops a conversation and shows people how to take the blinders off and open up a whole nother arena of business operation. And let's face it, where is there, you can go to Wharton Business School, okay, and you can get an MBA. And in fact, I believe that's where Donald Trump got his MBA. Okay, you can go there and you can learn about business, but that doesn't give you hands-on practical experience. And that's OJT. That's where you learn on the job how to do that. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're frustrated and you want to start your own business, you better have a lot of worldly experience. You better have worked for some entrepreneur that has really trained you well so that you're equipped to go out and do well in the business world. Or you better have something that takes off and makes you so much money that you can make mistakes and still make money.
I love that. That's so clear. So one of the things we always do is share a quote of the day, and I dove right into the conversation before sharing that. And I want to share it now because I found a quote that I think just really connects with this whole conversation around how to be an extraordinary entrepreneur. So you've told us what your definition of an entrepreneur is. I'd love to hear what your definition of extraordinary entrepreneur is. But that quote is that people do not decide to become extraordinary. They decide to accomplish extraordinary things. Edmund Hillary, who was a New Zealand mountaineer in the last century. Yes.
And by the way, he had a number of great quotes. There's some of my favorite quotes are from him. So there's a couple things that we want to look at here, and one of them is that people don't decide to become extraordinary. Some people determine that they want to achieve extraordinary things. Okay. Now in my world, that's a distinction. We distinctly separate two thoughts and talk about them differently. And I want to talk about becoming extraordinary because that's something that so few people talk about. It's such a rare conversation that I'd like to highlight the fact that ordinary people usually are not coachable. Ordinary people usually live in their comfort zone. Ordinary people have reasonable conversations about how to become or do reasonable things. They play small, they avoid risk, they like the status quo, and they live there comfortably. And that's what ordinary people do. Now, when you flip that coin over, extraordinary people are typically very coachable. Now, they may be uncomfortable when they're being coached, but they're very coachable. They become unreasonable with themselves, so they don't settle for just what's in front of them or what they think might work, but they turn themselves inside out oftentimes, and they become unreasonable with themselves and push themselves in places where it's uncomfortable for them. Oftentimes they're creative. They know how to leverage other people's skills, so they don't think they know everything, but they find people. The way they talk about the leadership of Ronald Reagan is that way, that he wasn't maybe so bright, but he really was good at picking bright people to surround himself with those kinds of people. They're oftentimes balanced. They're very good about integrity and keeping their word. They're proactive as opposed to reactive. They're open-minded. They're disciplined, and so on and so forth. So it's not that the two of you got up this morning and said, well, what shall we be, ordinary or extraordinary? It's likely the path, the goals that you've set, the vision for your future, for your marriage, for your business, for your life, okay? You want to be above the ordinary. You want to be extraordinary people to achieve those extraordinary things that Sir Edmund Hillary talks about. And so it takes oftentimes an extraordinary person to learn the disciplines and the characteristics of being extraordinary to achieve extraordinary things.
So I love that. I think that's beautifully put. And my sense here is that there's a consciousness in extraordinary entrepreneurs. This isn't a path that someone stumbles onto lightly, just like Edmund Hillary didn't climb mountains lightly, or Brad doesn't compete in Ironman triathlons lightly.
There you go.
Conscious decisions, right?
There you go.
I think I initially stumbled into being an entrepreneur and didn't like the stumbling. But I see myself in all these characteristics, which makes me feel pretty darn good, right?
Good.
But I'd love for you to unpack a little bit this concept of being coachable, because I have so many conversations with people that have awareness that they need help, and yet really I don't perceive them as coachable. So can you talk a little more about that?
Yes, I can. And
28 years.
And if you're just listening and not watching the video as I'm talking, Gary's like shaking his head back and forth, like, "Oh, yes, I can."
Well, what I want to say before I say what I'm going to say is that like this interview is coming off like we rehearsed it for a couple of days or something. Your questions are spot on, and they're in a beautiful chronological order.
Awesome.
So, again, this is another one of those conversations, Manette, that people don't want to talk about, and people don't have the courage to bring up, or maybe people just don't understand. So we break it down at businesscoach.com into 4 levels of coachability, okay? So there's not coachable. So that's somebody who is not coachable at all. There's selectively coachable. Okay, so that's somebody who says, well, I want to hire a coach, or I'm going to take advice from Brad over here, right? They're going to take about running an Ironman, but I'm not going to take all of his advice and utilize all his experience. I'm going to selectively pick out the pieces that I feel good about that Brad's going to share with me, and I'll use what I selectively will choose in that conversation. The third level is reluctantly coachable. And that's when I come to Brad and I say, Brad, I want to learn more about this, and I want you to coach me. And I know inside of me I'm going to be very uncomfortable, and I know that it's going to be painful at some level, whether it's emotionally, mentally, physically, or all the above. But yet I know he's done it, and I know that he has what it takes to coach me. So whether I like it or not is not the question. I'm going to go, and with lots of trepidation and concern, I'm going to be reluctantly coachable and do that. And then there's the Olympic level of coachability is completely coachable. Okay, and that is that the swimmer shows up at the pool side, and he's ready to do diving and backstroke and butterfly and all that. and the coach says, okay, here's where we're going to do today. We're going to start at 6:30 in the morning, and the inside of the swimmer, he's saying, I don't want to get up at 6:30 in the morning. And what we're going to do is you're going to do 25 laps of freestyle, then you're going to do this, and then you're going to do that. And it's not what the athlete wants, it's what the instructors tells him, the coach tells him, and they do it anyway. And they don't think about it. They just go, okay, that's what it takes to win this game. The coach knows best. Because you see, the real value in coaching, and again, this is another thing that's very rarely talked about. The real value in coaching is there's three things that a sharp coach can do for their client that the client will never, ever be able to do for themselves. Number one, they bring an outside objective opinion. For better, for worse, I'm not Brad, so if I'm going to coach Brad, I'm going to coach from over here looking at Brad, and so I'm coaching from here observing Brad, not being Brad. Number two, I can be his accountability partner. So when Brad starts to weaken, he starts to think about, do I really want this goal or not? I'm going to remind Brad what he said and what he said he was committed to. And I'm going to say, hey, come on, let's look at that vision that you had when we met and when we first sat down to set your goals up. Think about that. Don't think about the pain or the homework or the assignment. And the third thing is a good coach, a well-trained coach should be able to observe weaknesses that the client has and turn them into strengths. Okay, the quick example of that is, for me, until recently, I had my 2016 taxes and bookkeeping and everything mounted in a stack over on the credenza in my office, okay? And the bigger the stack got and the more receipts and tools and things that I put in that stack, the more embarrassed I got to call my accountant and my bookkeeper and say, hey, I'm coming over with this shoebox full of stuff, and I want to get my 16 return finished, and I want to get all my bookkeeping caught up to speed in 2017. Okay, so a couple of months ago, my coach just put his foot down and just said, today's the day. It all gets put into a bag and a box and a folder, but I'm not done. I kept saying, I've got more work. That's okay. Get it over there. Let's get started and take the first step.
I love that. And so you have a coach yourself.
Of course, yeah.
Right. And I think this is
that wasn't even a question.
That wasn't even a question. And I think this is another thing that as coaches, so those people who are listening to this call, if you are a coach, you have to have a coach, because how can you ever convince anyone else to invest in coaching through you and invest in themselves through you if you yourself aren't constantly growing and evolving, right? So it's, I think, such another level of this conversation.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
And so I love your 4 levels of coachability. That's brilliant. And I'm sure that coaches who study with you in your certification programs find that one of the most invaluable tools that they learn is being able to quickly assess where someone is on that scale. But I'd love to maybe hear one of your favorite success stories of a business that you've helped, because oftentimes people don't even know what a business coach can do for them.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Another great question, right in line with the others. I oftentimes tell this story of a landscape contractor, commercial and residential landscape contractor that had 200 employees, and his CPA had referred the two of us to get together. And he kept avoiding me and avoiding me and avoiding me, and kept saying he didn't need a coach. And accidentally, divine coincidence, the CPA and I were having lunch, and the potential client walked in, and the formal introduction beyond email and whatnot happened. And then eventually, through a bunch of different emails and phone calls and appointments, I finally sat down. And after meeting with this gentleman for over an hour, in a building that he owned free and clear, okay? And he had just purchased another property to move his headquarters in, a newer, bigger, better facility. He made the point that he owned all of his equipment free and clear. So he had 200 employees with I don't know how many trucks and tractors and lawnmowers and diggers and trench backhoes and so on and so forth. And so I figured that his net worth was probably north of $10 million when I was doing the math in my head and adding all this up. And he put his arms behind his head and he leaned back and he said, "Do you have any more questions for me, Coach Gary?" After I had made copious notes of this interview and I said, "Well, yeah, I do have one more question." And he had a big smile on his face, like, "Okay, see, shoot one more at me." I said, "So how many hours a week would you say that you work?" was the question. And he stared at me as though, "How dare you ask the question that one's not on the sheet of potential questions here." And he stared at me, and it seemed like 10 minutes, but it was probably 10 seconds or 20 seconds. And he said, "Well," he says, "I suppose that," he says, "I work 65 or 70 hours a week to build this empire," right? He was one of the most successful landscape contractors in the 11 Western states. And so I said, "Wow," I said, "that's really interesting." He says, but he says, "Now understand," he says, "I always take my wife to Hawaii for a couple of weeks every year. And my son and I go on hunting trips and fishing trips and so on and so forth. So I take time to be with my family." And I said, "There is one more question there." I said, "How does your family feel about that?" And again, he gave me the same stare, seemed like forever that he was staring at me like, "How dare you ask that question?" And the words that came out of his mouth shocked me. He said, "How much did you say it was going to cost me to hire you as my business coach?" and in the ensuing weeks and months, I think he was a client for about 18 to 24 months after that, we found out that his profitability, his margins and profit were great, that he had great employees, great hiring practices, and so on and so forth. But the CFO was also his HR director. She was also his personal secretary sometimes, and she was the office manager, and she was just worked on the ground. And she invited it. That was her personality. So we changed that. We found out there wasn't a training program, and the way we found that out is because they were having a hard time hiring supervisor level and managerial level people. We found out some of the employees were working long and hard, and some of the managers were being underpaid. So we went through a litany of different things that we found. And 18 months later, this gentleman and I had lunch, and I asked him, I said, "So how many hours a week would you say you're working now?" He says, "Well," he says, "I worked 15 hours last week." But he said, "I had to look for things to do."
Wow.
I had to look for things to do.
It's
So you see,
a beautiful story.
Yeah. So you can't see the forest for the trees. As an owner, you see 180 degrees of what's going on in your business. You can't see 360 degrees. And you don't know how many other people are surrounding themselves, working long hours or subordinating their families or their interests to provide your business with the outcome that you want. But when you get a 360 degree view and you have a coach, somebody to point out some things to you, the world opens up. And then you can work on projects that you didn't even know existed.
So not only do I love that, but I think it ties so beautifully back to that very beginning of the conversation about how to be an effective leader, where you're really creating a company that's a win-win-win for everybody concerned, for the leader, for the employees, and the growth opportunity, as well as for the profitability. That was a great illustration of pulling that all together. It's so awesome.
Thank you.
So Gary, thank you so much.
Like
I know it is. And I feel like we could just keep pulling all these incredible stories out of you. And I'm sure you have many, many amazing ones. And that one was great. Where can we send people to learn more about what you're up to, or take advantage of some of the, I'm sure, brilliant content that you have out there floating around the internet?
We're happy to do that. We're very generous with our proprietary material, so people don't necessarily always have to pay us to learn some of what we have, some of our material. They can go to our website, businesscoach.com. There's lots of free things at www.businesscoach.com. People ask me, so your name of your company is businesscoach.com. What's your website? www.com. No, it does throw people off. Like you said, how do you get the name, or when did you get the name? And then people can reach me directly, Gary, Gary, Gary at businesscoach.com.
Awesome. Gary, thank you so much. I appreciate the depth of knowledge, your clear passion for what you're doing and the fact that you're still doing it. And I'd love to have you back another time and have your wife come along with you and talk about some of the things that she's done to help all of this grow, as well as what is it like to work with your spouse for so long.
Yeah, good. Love to do that. We'd love to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was great.
Really fun. This is the Path to Profit podcast. I'm Brad Dobson and my wife, Dr. Minette Riordan. We had a blast today with Gary Henson. Hope everybody has a great day.
And make sure you go and leave us some comments on iTunes. You always forget to say that part. And we love your comments and feedback so we can bring you more amazing people like Gary.
Bye, guys.